seen on TV that first plane hit World Trade Center.
I heard some commotion and talking about a plane hitting one of the towers.
Someone said, "Hey, come here quick." And so we ran in there and seen the second airplane crash into the tower.
All of a sudden, people said, come, see right away, something's happened.
We got calls asking for officers to come down, man a canteen and go out.
It wasn't very long after the first plane hit that everybody knew that this was a major event.
When we got the call to go, we were there on site 3 hours after the crash.
We need emotional and spiritual care people, and we need her there today. And in just a couple of hours, they called back and said, "Danny, we're going to need you to handle the press relations as well."
Then Joe came and he told me that he had to go down to work at the tower with the canteen. It was tough. We cried together because when you said goodbye, you didn't know if you'd see each other again.
The story of these three Salvation Army siblings who, by the coincidence of appointment, were in the right place at the right time for the right reasons to do the right ministry at 9/11.
We had a wonderful family life. My parents would have devotions with us regularly. Dad, he was very sturdy. It's hard to describe him. He was so different.
He was very spiritual. He would pray and pray and pray and pray all hours of day and night. We learned how to pray because of him. And one time we were kneeling and praying. Ed would always pray last. Ed fell asleep. Oh, Dad used to get upset with that. He would start praying all over again.
5, 6, 7 decades ago, parents had favorites, and I was the favorite. I took advantage of that favoritism. My dad would give me a piggyback ride home from the end of the bus line to the projects, and I'd be on his back, and I'd look down and see Esther and Joe walking home. And
Esther and I never got a ride on Dad's shoulders. I don't think ever remembering that.
Oh, Mom was a hard-working person. I remember she did housework for other people, and when she got home, she would fix us dinner, and she was very tired.
She was a hard worker. Good spiritual person. I love people. Dad taught us to pray. Mom taught us to love.
Memories is that we were less fortunate, our family was. We were poor, was living in the projects all through elementary school. I do know that.
Well, we didn't know we were poor. Our clothes were clean. Our shoes were polished.
I always felt that I should have been a minister. I would witness to kids at school. I mean, we went to Catherine Kuhlman, and my dad received a healing service. He crushed his kneecap working on a railroad. He received a healing that day. And it was fantastic.
We went to a summer camp. I don't remember what it was called, but we were there for 9 weeks.
I believe the name of the camp was Christ Mission. The only reason why we went there was because there was a problem at home. So we went to camp.
It was a hard summer. Every other week we had the same food and got tired of some of those foods, and some of those foods I won't even eat today.
It was lonely at times, okay, even though you had all those kids around you. The only times we saw Mom and Dad or Uncle Warren or Maggie and Grandma was on a Sunday.
We didn't realize how ill she really was until she was hospitalized. We were called to the hospital where she had been staying, and we watched them, turn the oxygen tank off on her. So that was difficult. We didn't want to lose her. We didn't know that she was that sick.
I don't remember a whole lot of my mother. She died when I was 13. And what was she like?
She was a good mom. She took care of us because Dad was always working. I don't remember too much about Mom, but I do remember the day she died, probably more than anything else. This is hard. It always has been. I miss her.
Life did change. It was a sad time for us, a sad time for Mom and for me.
I had did my own thing. kind of turned my back on God, got into drugs.
Ed, the dad, would often speak about himself as, I don't do enough, I should have been a preacher, I could have done more. And he did preach. He preached through his children, through his grandchildren, and preaching, of course, is way more than standing in a pulpit.
I have a hard time remembering my dad saying, I love you, as a child. But to hear those words, it wasn't until later in life when I would look him in the eye and say, Dad, look at me. I said, do you love me? He said, yes. I said, tell me. He said, I love you. I said, I love you too. From then on, it was a common phrase.
Of course, Dad was living with our youngest brother. They were so faithful to him and caring for him. But I remember getting the call from Ed saying, you better come up here because Dad is not expected to live. And we did. But he already had passed. And I remember sitting in his room while Ed was taking care of other business, just holding his hand, feeling his body get cold.
It was probably the hardest funeral that I have ever participated in because I was so emotionally involved. And by then, I knew Ed really, really well. Everything about his life revolved around, I'm trying to please Jesus with what I do, what I say, and where I go. Oh, I think he would have said God is using these children. He's using them in a remarkable way. I understand the joy that they expressed to me about their ministry, and if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me.
Both of the buildings were down, and there's a lot of confusion that was taking place. I mean, the police just opened up the road for us, kept on waving us on to where we needed to go. The other canteen was on the east side, and being the second canteen, they said, go on the west side at West End. And we ended up being at the command center, West End Avenue. We just started talking to firemen and policemen, and they start telling us how they got out and their stories and their families. Some just needed the water to throw on their face or to wipe out the ash that might be on their eyelids and that. The smell, it's a stench of death that was down there at Ground Zero, wherever you went. And then the sound, at some places the sound was just quiet. Over by the church where many of the rescue workers went, and firemen and policemen who slept on their pews there. We were there to comfort. We were there to listen more than to say anything at that time because, they were hurting. Everyone was scared. We were scared. We just did what we were called to do, be available. And while I was there, Building 7 came down, and the cloud of smoke and everything was coming our way. And we decided to stay there, not knowing if we would be surrounded by all that cloud of debris or what. We prayed, Lord, protect us. And the wind shifted, and a block away, the smoke went the other way. Just another miracle in life.
We had been in New York for 2 weeks immediately prior to the attack on America. We were in the World Trade Center on Saturday. It became very personal and very emotional. And of course, as a Salvation Army officer, having had more than 30 years of experience by then, I knew that immediately we were going to be pressed into action. The first call came for Esther, and we're going to deploy her to the Family Resources Center that the Pentagon has set up.
First thing I did was call Joe to make sure they were okay. I remember thinking about what Joe and Cookie were doing, and then we heard about what happened in Pennsylvania. And we heard that Ed and Judy were involved with the canteen. It was such a difficult time, very difficult. When we first went to the Pentagon, it was still on fire. The odor was awful. We saw people sitting there waiting to hear about their family.
It was after midnight when we got there. We parked the car near the Pentagon and walked into the general area. The building was on fire. The firefighters were still there. Search and rescue people were there. And the parking lot was empty, except that I saw one lone figure sitting on a bench or a stool there. I was drawn to this person, and I walked toward her. And when I sat down beside her, she was shivering and she was shaking and she was sobbing. And she pointed a shaky finger at the Pentagon and said to me, "My baby's in there." And she meant not an infant child, but she meant that one of her children had been killed in this event. I immediately knew, of course, every day was going to be like that it was going to be an emotional experience as well as an opportunity for service.
We were in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is probably 50 miles from the crash site of Flight 93 in Shanksville. We were waiting to be dispatched because we did have a canteen at our Corps. Of course, we were in prayer that God would use us and prepare us on our journey down to the site. There's some kind of shed building that we parked our canteen. It was the closest we could get to the site. From what we could see, there's a hole in the ground, some scorched trees.
At that time, I was recovering from depression and going through that, and it sort of helped. You know, it started the healing process more so. It helped me to be a better listener to the needs of people. It helped for me to feel the pain. I found out that in order to be a good listener, you got to enter into a person's pain and their misery as well. And other people, even afterwards, you know, we'd walk on the street, and if we're in a uniform, I mean, people would stop and say, "Thank you for being there." They may have been thanking us, but they were thanking the Army. That's the greatest feeling in life, I think, as a Christian, to know that the Lord is able to use you in spite of who you are.
And it's through the ministry of the Salvation Army, man, that our lives came together and was fulfilled.
My faith in other people, my faith in knowing that something could happen at any time, that you have to be ready to meet your Maker. You never know.
In the course of experiencing that, it came into my head, this same thing is happening in New York, and Joe and Cookie are a part of that. This same thing is happening in Pennsylvania, and Ed and Judy are a part of that. You know the Old Testament story of Esther, when the opportunity came to address the king, and her uncle said to her, "Esther, maybe this is why you are here, for a time like this." And I believe that those three, the family into which I married, were there for that very same reason, that God placed them there for such a time as this.